Will be an informal presentation. We will have just a brief presentation about our topic, which is IEPs and positive behavior intervention plans. And then we will open up to discussion and questions. And we have on our panel today, John Fody, who is, you can introduce yourself, John.
Hello, my name is John Fody. I have Asperger's. I am on the Red River Valley Autism Asperger Network Speakers Bureau. I do public speaking, also freelance, and I am the video editor for our website.
Thank you, John. So welcome. I would like to introduce Margie Gray, who is the Vice President of the Red River Valley Asperger Autism Network, who's going to be our presenter today. Thank you.
Thank you. So you all have the PowerPoint presentation as a handout, and that's really going to be the foundation of this just general overview of individualized education plans and positive behavioral intervention plans. So starting out talking about IEPs, you know, the purpose of an IEP is, bottom line, to set everyone up for success, specifically your child, but also the educators involved with your child, because any of us who have a child on the spectrum know that there are ways that work in terms of working with the child and ways that really can interfere with their ability to function effectively. So an IEP is a written plan, you know, by sort of defining what it is. It's a written plan. It is written according to federal and state regulations. It identifies how to meet the needs of each individual child, and it supports anyone who works with the child in knowing what the supports are for that child. And it is not written to meet the needs of the child based on the current resources of the school. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind, that if a child needs something, and this was something that I didn't know coming into the process. I didn't know what was reasonable to ask the school to provide for my child. And what I learned is that if they don't have the resources, the school has resources to be able to get those resources. They have avenues to get those resources. And sometimes it takes pushing the issue a little bit in order for everyone to get on the same page with that. So looking at the components of an IEP, I'm going to sort of run through them quickly and then talk about a few things specifically. So an IEP, or Individualized Education Plan, is going to have information on present levels of performance. And that's information that's going to come from the school, that is going to be based on the testing that they've done. And they have likely gone through a series of tests that assess speech and language progress, IQ testing, behavioral testing. There's all kinds of observational information that they're going to include in the IEP. So it's going to include both academic and their ability to function. There should be measurable annual goals, including how those goals will be measured, how it will be determined as to whether the goals are achieved or not. There will be a list and schedule of services that are to be provided to the child, and that includes special ed services, related services, supplementary aid. That's that whole package of information in terms of how the child will be supported. And then additionally, there will be a list of the program modifications and support for school personnel on behalf of the child, the amount of time that they'll be away or out of the mainstream classroom, as well as accommodations for standardized testing if the child requires accommodations. My son, in his, it specifically states that it can be broken up over a couple of days because his test stamina is not as strong as some of his peers. So he gets to break those tests up. He has to complete each section as it started, but for him, he gets to spread it out a little bit more than other students do. And then for students who are 16 and older, there should be a statement of post-secondary goals and the supports that the school will be providing for that transition, all right? So out of all of that whole list of things, there were a few things that I felt like we could really add some additional context, some additional support, because they're things that, if they're not done fully, you can really miss out on opportunities for working with the child, okay? So the IEP goals and measurement of those goals. So goals should be concrete and measurable, and I think that this is probably one of the places where IEPs most frequently have a gap. We saw it early on with my son's IEPs that the goals were sort of like, they were fuzzy and they were, you'd sit back and go, well, how do you measure that, right? And the school continued to work and really came a long way in terms of writing goals, and some of the goals that we've seen, and the goals are going to be based on where your child is right now and what is that next step that we feel like they can accomplish, right? That we as a team, the educators and the parents, feel that the child can achieve. So a goal might be something like, student will complete math assignment in class with no more than 3 prompts 80% of the time. That is completely measurable, right? If a child is given a math assignment and it takes more than 3 prompts, frequently, more than 50% of the time, you know they haven't met the goal yet. And the goal might start out being child completes an assignment in the classroom or in the resource room with assistance 80% of the time. That may be where you start. That may be your first level goal. Or child completes 50% of the assignment in the classroom or in the resource room with assistance 80% of the time. You have to figure out where the child is and make sure that they're really manageable steps and that you're not asking for too much too fast. So that's an example of the type of sort of academic goal, getting academic work done. And then more of a social type of goal. For a student that really is focused on their own interests and doesn't engage in a back and forth kind of way with peers. A goal might be, student will engage in partner's chosen topic. So something that someone, a conversation partner or classmate might bring up. The tendency might be for a child to, their peer brings up, oh, I'm really excited because I got a new Lego set that I've started to build. And my child might say, might not even acknowledge that, and might just say, there's an episode of Star Wars that I get to watch this evening when I get home. And not because it's this is something I'm excited about, this is something I'm excited about, but just because that's what's on their mind right now, right? So this kind of a social goal, and this year is the first time we've got these in my son's IEP, and I don't remember what his specifically says in terms of percentages, etc. But the fact that the idea that a student will engage in partner's chosen topic with at least 3 exchanges. So I'm really excited about my Lego set that I've started to build. Oh, really? What kind of Legos are they? Oh, it's this new Star Wars vehicle that I saw in the store and my mom got me for my birthday. Oh, that's cool. What kind of vehicle is it? Right? So you start to develop the back and forth, and that's something that the SLP is going to be working with them on, and that the SLP would be evaluating to see if that skill is being developed. So that's a really clear, measurable goal that's important. It's important to have those kinds of things in the IEP, and it not just be this soft, vague, you know, the child's going to do better in school, the child's going to interact with peers better. There are ways of measuring it, and for a skilled SLP, OT, you know, all of those folks who are working with the kids, they're going to be able to identify what are the benchmarks and what's reasonable for right now. So that's my pulpit on goals and measurements.
Can I add to that at all?
Sure.
When I have those in my child's IEP, I always, and if she's not meeting those goals, my next question is why and when. Emily can meet these goals in September, she can meet these goals in May, but she can't in December. So then we have to look to why. So when, you know, I'm not sure how I'm adding to it. I'm just saying when I look at these, I always want to know why. Why can't she perform 80% of the time? Does she need more assistance? Is it because it's December? Is it because you're pushing too hard? And I think that's a
Or is it just that she needs more practice?
Exactly. You know, it's just, I think that's always important to add is if it's not being met, why, when, where, and then that's where you have to have your teachers observe more and you need to ask that question.
The other piece of that is that this is a working document, so it's wise to go ahead and meet regularly and check on progress. Yep. And because there may be some times around holidays when things are too hectic and she doesn't have as much coping strategy as or facility as she normally would have, that might explain some of it, or maybe not. But that's why it's good to have that ongoing dialogue with the school.
Yeah, in the beginning I got really frustrated because I was like, well, I know she knows them, you know, and that was just a question I started asking, when and why, and that helps a parent and a teacher assess why or why not they're meeting those goals.
And you can tweak the program a little bit then.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. So the next piece of the IEP that I wanted to just sort of touch on is looking at accommodations and modifications. And those are things anywhere from the child's going to get para support. And that would be clearly identified how many hours of para support. Well, I've been told they don't do that in North Dakota. In my son's IEP, it has specifically how many hours of para support he gets per week. And it identifies how many hours per week he has with his special ed teacher, how many hours per week he has with the SLP and the OT. Those are the supports that help him to be successful. And other types of things, so these are all of the things that can be done to support the child in being successful. And these are the specific things, right? So like they have the option to go, or they do go, depending on where the child is, whether they are at a point where it's clear that they need to go outside the classroom in order to accomplish a specific task, right? So it might start out that anytime my son does math, he needs to go to the resource room to do his math because that's where he's going to be able to find the focus. There's going to be one-on-one support, or at least that constant reminder in terms of staying focused on the math. Later on, it might be that he has the option to go to the resource room if he feels like he needs that in order to accomplish the assignment. Other things, they could choose to have lunch in the resource room because of the sensory overload of the cafeteria. Once a skill is demonstrated, no additional repetitious work is required. That was something that we had in my son's IEP. He couldn't deal with all that repetition. I already know it, why do I have to do it again? So look at your child's specific needs. What are the things that are going to support them What are the things that are an obstacle for them? Start with the obstacles and work your way back as to how that obstacle can be avoided, right? And your team of educators should be an infinitely useful resource in identifying how those obstacles can be overcome, all right? So that's what I have in terms of just big picture overview on IEPs. Looking at positive behavioral intervention plans. Now, a positive behavioral intervention plan, generally speaking, is going to come in place when there's been a behavior that is unacceptable, like tackling, biting, melting down in which the classroom's getting trashed, you know, things like that. Behaviors that don't or shouldn't fall into this are, he needs to stand up when he's doing his math. That might be a distraction to the teacher, but it's not a disruptive behavior in terms of being destructive or putting anyone, including the student involved, in danger. Does that make sense? I just wanted to make sure that when we talk about behaviors, if a child has a coping strategy, like standing up to be able to do their work, that's a coping strategy. That's not something that a behavior intervention plan would be written for. If it's distracting to the teacher, that's a different issue altogether. So the purpose of a positive behavioral intervention plan, in a lot of places it's just called a BIP, a behavior intervention plan. But a positive behavior intervention plan should include the same things as a BIP. So you're working with a defined behavior, one specific behavior, to reduce the severity of each incident. And this is sort of from, this is our first step to this is our ultimate goal, right? So to reduce the severity of each incident, reduce the frequency of the incident, teach staff strategies and skills to manage or eliminate the behavior, and teach the student strategies and skills to manage or eliminate the behavior. So the components of a positive behavior intervention plan are to define the behavior. What is it? Student is tackling other students on the playground during recess, right? There should be a clearly identified function of the behavior, and that's going to be accomplished through an FBA, or a functional behavioral assessment, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. The positive interventions should be identified, and that's positive interventions to prevent the behavior, and also a section on response to the behavior. If the behavior does occur, what should the staff response be? As part of that, you should be defining terms. My idea of what constitutes an emergency or danger might be different from yours. So everybody should be on the same page in terms of those terms. And then setting measurable goals. So an FBA, which is the next page, is going to assist you in setting all that up, because an FBA is going to help you understand why the behavior is occurring and identify ways to replace that inappropriate behavior with one that's more suitable, that serves the same function. So if a child is getting into trouble for tackling out on the playground, and it's because they get caught up in the moment, and the more they get escalated, the less ability they have to stop and to manage that behavior. So the goal of this is going to be to identify not just what the behavior is, but what are some strategies for teaching how to stop before it escalates. Does that make sense? Okay, so knowing the cause will give the opportunity to develop effective individualized behavior interventions. So what is it that they get out of it, or they're escaping, or they're avoiding through this behavior? There are less obvious causes, though, that we have to look at. You know, sometimes it's not what they're getting out of it, it's what is going on inside their mind, you know, like what's the framing that's going on inside their mind that is causing this. It might be fear of a negative outcome or a desire to appear competent. You know, getting to the root cause of the behavior is really essential, and that detective work is really tricky because it's all about asking the right questions, and I've had some really amazing experiences with that. When you do get to the right question and figure it out, it's like, oh, of course, it makes sense now. But in a PBIP, you want to make sure you're focused on the interventions, the upfront interventions. I'll tell you that the first one of these that I went through, there was this long list of this is what happens if he starts to melt down, or this is what happens if he starts to tackle people or gets out of control on the playground. And the part that was the positive intervention part was one sentence. And I said, this doesn't work for me. And I sat down and I wrote it. I was like, these are the things that need to happen. Social story before he goes out on the playground. Ask him if he thinks he can handle being out on the playground today or if he's too stressed. My list was longer than theirs when it came down to having those positive interventions. These are the things we need to focus on up front so that we don't have to use that back end piece.
You can write your own.
I wrote them and I gave them to his special ed teacher who agreed with all of them, and she cut and pasted into the document. So make sure that if you have ideas about this, that you're getting those ideas in there. So you want to identify the triggers, the strategies for avoiding them, instructions. So one of the things that we sort of threw out there had to do with holds. And my personal opinion is that if the child's environment really supports them, it's not much of an issue, right? The bottom line is prone holds should not happen, period.
That
They're
means lying
just
the child down on the floor and holding him down.
Right. It's too dangerous. It's too dangerous. And it happens, and if you really want to get scared, go to the Minnesota Department of Education site and read the SEEP report on prone holds that came out last year. It's mostly our kids that are being put in those situations. A great percentage of the kids that are in that kind of a situation, which tells me that their environment isn't supporting them, right? So holds, prone holds, my personal opinion is never, but they should be trained in, what's the name of it?
CPI, crisis prevention.
Intervention.
Intervention, and it should be specifically oriented to children on the spectrum, because it's different, a little bit different.
Yeah. So just that's one piece of information that that I think it's important to at least bring it up. And have goals. There should be short-term and long-term goals. So the short-term goal is like not melting down, not attacking someone, right? The long-term goal is how do I manage that? How do I manage all that emotion when it starts to come up from a long-term perspective? So there are those short-term intervention crisis things that you're looking at, but also teaching the long-term skills. The parental role in the process is really, really important, though. In the big picture, you are so important in this process. You are invaluable in the process because as much as educators know your child, they have not spent as much time with your child as you have. And so it's important to make sure that the strengths of the child are put into an IEP, because the way you work with anything is you take the strengths and you build on them. That's how growth, development, and learning take place. Looking at strengths and building on them. The process can be very emotional. And the more grounded and calm you can be, the more you come in prepared, organized, with facts, the better off the process will flow. I really don't believe that educators come into wake up in the morning and say, how am I going to mess with this kid's life? right? I really don't think that happens. I think that there are educators who don't have as much information as they need, and we've found that along the way, that we've done a lot of education. And that's a role that you can play as a parent, is educating them as to what works and what doesn't with your child. But also know that you can bring anyone you want to an IEP meeting. If you want an advocate to come with you, if you want someone to come with you who is just there for moral support, you have that right. And if things don't go well, you have rights. So you don't have to sign anything you don't agree with. You can request a facilitated IEP meeting, and you have options including mediation. You can make a due process request, and you can make a complaint to the State Department of Education, and they will come in, evaluate the situation, and sometimes what they find out is the school doesn't have enough resources, and the Department of Education is responsible for making sure they do have the resources they need. So I was told that's not necessarily a bad thing if the state comes in to review, because it can actually be helpful.
And the things that you have mentioned are sometimes buried in a website as to how do I find where those forms are, that kind of thing. So one thing I'd like to add right here is that you should always get a document like this at your every single IEP. You don't have to accept it every IEP. I mean, we've been doing it for 8 years, so we don't take one every time. But this gives you your safeguards and the procedures, the timelines, and in the back are indexes for those particular forms. So they're here. We also can give you information about how to contact those folks in Minnesota and in North Dakota. This is the one from North Dakota. It's required through the IDEA law that this be given in every state. So they may look a little different, but they have all those rules in them.
When I was a teacher, we sent that with the notification. Do they do that?
That's a much better way. It's not done at my grandson's school, but it's given at times, especially if you're new to an IEP process, if your child has recently been diagnosed or is coming new to the district, you can ask them to give you this ahead of time so that it shows you what things you can do to be prepared.
What's that called?
It's the parent guide of your rights and responsibilities. The thing about this that I think is so important is that this is a team effort. And you as a parent, we as parents are equally as involved in this, or should be, as the school personnel. And sometimes, being a retired educator myself, I know that sometimes I would get kind of carried away with that I knew this child so well. Well, I didn't know him as well as his parents did, or her. There's a framework that a principal that I worked with used that I really like. The school knows children, let's say at 4th grade, very well. You know your child very well, are the best. Where those two things cross is where you can do your best work. Where what school knows about 4th graders and what you know about where your child is functioning, that's when you work well together. And it's sometimes parents get the feeling that they're being dismissed or not listened to in the IEP, and that's wrong. You need to know that you are an important, valuable member of this team. And it's good to come in with a list of things you would like to be sure and talk about during that time. You may not have enough time in one IEP meeting. You may have to have two, especially if you're getting started in a new school or you're starting a process from scratch. And there's nothing wrong with that, and you won't be looked at as a bad person or as being bossy or pushy. This is what you can bring to the meeting to help you. Well, for me, it helps me focus on what it is we want to make sure is covered. And then also, so that the school knows that we've really been putting some thought into this and want to work together.
If I add that, I think there are some that might perceive you as bossy and pushy. And my advice to them is to not let it bother you. You can get very intimidated by teachers, and it's very humbly is not the right word. So if they think of that of you, you cannot let it bother you. My dad says, be a duck in a rainstorm. Just let the water roll off your feathers.
What?
Because you are right, it's your child, and how they feel about you. Sometimes I think when teachers have that perception, it makes more work for them with what you're saying, and that's a good thing. Growing, changing, stretching, learning, and it is frustrating to take on more responsibility.
It brings up you bring up a good point, which is that we need to, all of us in this meeting, need to approach it as we're working together. And if you get to a point where you feel like that's not happening, you can always use some of your social skills and step back and say, you know, this isn't feeling really good to me right now. I'm not feeling listened to. If you use the I statement instead of you, you're not listening. People are more likely to listen. And you can ask for a break. Say, you know, I'm getting really upset right now. This happened to my daughter in fourth grade IEP meeting. They kept talking about all the things that were challenging. And she was near tears. She says, can't anybody say anything positive about my child? And nobody answered. And so she was crying, so we took a break. You know, I have to step away. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly all right because you want to keep those channels of communication open. I
would add one thing to that too. I had maybe the flip side of that with our son when he started out in elementary school. And I was not prepared for the fact that I can come across as a very not bitchy, but very strong person. And I just needed to say, you know what, we are all on the same team. I'm an educator, my husband's an educator, we have got your back, we absolutely want to be doing this together, and my goodness, the things just gel after that. It's like, oh, okay, good. She's just not coming down like the, professor know-it-all, blah, 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 that, thinks she's got it all going on. No, we're all trying to do the same thing. And it was helpful from the other perspective as well.
I said, listen, I'm doing this for you too.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes your day easier, it makes my daughter's day easier, and in turn it makes my day easier.
Our desired outcome is all the same. Yeah.
And I have a strong personality, and you're just going to kind of have to smile at me. But, it's the way it goes.
Does anybody have any questions about this is a lot of material to cover in kind of a short time.
I don't have a question, I just have a suggestion. We've been at this a long time now, and when it comes to IEPs, as a parent, you can have an IEP meeting of the team whenever you want. And we have them every month throughout the school year. And when you call those meetings, remember you're in charge. It's your meeting, it's not the school's. So one of the things we do is I keep control of the meeting, so it's going to direct, like Joanne says, I always make sure we actually make an agenda. We treat it as a meeting. But the secret to it is we're dealing with humans here, the school staff. We always bring treats.
That's such a smart, that is worth coming here today all by itself.
It works because now we get people, they show up at our meetings because they're getting to be famous for what's the song we're going to bring this time. And we brought everything from bars to cookies to candy bars to pizzas. I mean, if we try to do that so that they come, it makes them feel a little more relaxed. We're trying to make it not controversial or confrontational. We want to work together. And so we all sit down and then we sit down. I hand out an agenda. I say, here's the points we're going to talk about today. On our monthly ones, we're basically just going to say any issues. We go around the room, everybody knows everything's fine, and he's great, let's get out of here. But we want to keep that communication going between us and those educators, as well as we want them to feel part of what we all connect. And it's especially harder, I found, as we get up in the years because you have less contact with the school teachers in high school.
How old is your student?
You'll be a senior next week.
So, is it after school meeting or?
Yeah, we normally meet after school. Right after school. We have our normal.
Do you label it as an IEP meeting every single time, rather than just like get together or
No, we call it an IEP meeting. That gives us the authority to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, and I was a special ed teacher, and I remember our director being at one of the meetings because it was a kind of a, it was some parents, and she said these IEPs are not written in blood. They can be changed at any time. And I'll never forget that. And the parents, you could just call, okay, we can change this at any time.
Well, and
that
that's an
made a
important
big-
point,
Yes.
because you can also do that more informally. You don't
Yes.
have to call. You can ask to add or subtract something by email or telephone. And as long as the people who make up that team all agree to it, then it can be done. Because sometimes some schools, it may be more of a difficulty finding the time to get everybody together. So it can be a little more informal, especially if you have a really good relationship with the team and you feel comfortable with them. But nothing can be changed on the IEP without your input. That's important to know.
You get paras to come, and I'll elaborate on that. When I ask that it's important for paras to come, they say, we will ask them, but we can't make them, or they're kind of hemming and hawing, where I see it as the special ed teacher spends maybe an hour or so with my child, and the paras spend the rest of the day with the child, so I can't see why they would not be there. To me, it's like when you go into the hospital and the doctor checks in on you, but don't you guys ask the nurses about the patient? Because the nurses are always there. So what's the, when I say I want this para and this para and this para there, and they respond to me, what's my,
Mark, I saw you
I
respond
can
to
answer
that.
that.
thank you.
Paras are paid by the hour, and the school's not going to pay them to come to us. Because they get over their hours per week, and they have time and a half issues and all sorts of things. It's back to the bringing treat.
That's what I was gonna say, is that where coffee comes in play?
Well, what we give our paras is Subway gift cards.
Okay.
5 bucks at Subway, hand it each to them, come to the meeting, talk to us a little bit. I mean, their work, we're talking, you gotta, something you gotta.
And the
You bring up
parents are good
something.
about showing up, it's the teachers that seem to be quite hesitant to ask them, and that
Well,
must be why, because they have to
they
pay
can't
them.
pay them, so, so you can't ask them.
Okay, so that should be more my response.
They're off
to
the
entice
clock.
them. Okay.
Another thing to think about is, coming from the teacher in me speaking, is, we as teachers tend to hear more about when things aren't going well. That's what we hear about. And so it's really nice for us as parents of kids being served to drop them a line now and again. This is going well, thank you, I appreciate that. A $5 coffee gift card at Christmas or at a holiday, something like that is very well appreciated. When I've done that, it's like I've given somebody $100, but it's simply the recognition that someone else is working really hard with your child, and that's really a nice thing to do. There may be times, though, when things don't go well, and you do have protections and safeguards for when that happens, and they're pretty much in this book. And John, you had mentioned to me beforehand,
that I
As our-
have some
as our
things.
expert who's lived it, do you have some things you wanted to share with us about
Yes.
this process?
As a person with Asperger's and as a person who has gone through the school system, I'm going to be able to talk to you about my own personal experiences from my perspective. For the IEP, a lot of the things that was written in there that really helped me and may help your children is that I have a lot of difficulty writing notes down, looking up at the board, listening to a teacher, and writing things down. My brain just is slow at processing all that. So I have a para or an aide that takes notes for me, and I'm just allowed to listen to what's being said, and I learn a lot better that way. That it took a long time to get the teachers to actually agree to do that, but we got it. We got it in there. We also had the ability to have extra time on tests. It was written on the IEP that I could have 2.5 times additional to the normal standard test time, because working under pressure and having to do a 100-question test in 30 minutes it's a lot of pressure and can kind of derail me or distract me. So I just got extra time, and that was very helpful as well. If there were times in which the classroom got too hectic or disruptive from other students and I couldn't concentrate, I just go to a different room and do my homework there, take my test there, read my textbook there. And again, that was helpful. In middle school, when you started having the whole concept of hall passes, I had the ability to take walks when I needed to just to de-stress by a laminated hall pass that I carried with me all the time. There were sometimes, a lot of times, and this was mostly in elementary school, but I would learn specific subjects one-on-one with a teacher or a resource group teacher or para, and that was very helpful. This one was done a long time ago, early elementary school years. I barely remember it, but we did have it for like grading spelling. They didn't want to discourage me from trying to spell if I got a letter wrong in a word at that early age, so they graded it as by the letter. Instead of having one letter off, you get the full word off, the full point, dot, dot. You just get a letter, dot, dot.
That's a great accommodation. I never thought of that as a teacher. I wish I had.
Yeah.
You missed by one instead of
The whole word. Yeah. And that was encouraging to keep on trying, because I was like, oh, well, I got this letter wrong. What's the point?
Did you have a tendency to, this is kind of a personal question, but did you have a tendency to, once you made a mistake, think everything was terrible, the whole thing was wrong, and then it was hard to move on?
I had that concept in my mind early age. Yeah.
Because I see that with my grandson a lot. So this would be a way to kind of counter some of that by focusing on, yeah, but look at all these you did get right in this one.
Yep. So that was helpful in that way, because otherwise you just get this whole, I messed up completely, but instead, okay, you got one letter wrong. We also did have, this was throughout all of the schools, elementary, middle, and high school, was that I would have a built-in time to go to a resource room every day, and then eventually I just got to the point of, just go when you need to. So you built up your abilities to do that, and you just kind of accommodate that as things go along and adjust it as time goes on. This one is kind of an interesting story. In 9th grade, I had a science teacher that absolutely refused to do any of the accommodations of my IEP. Just refused. Didn't want to do it at all. And it became very stressful. I was not functioning very well in that class. And it got to the point of that I got so frustrated, I just didn't want to go to that class. And then so we had the IEP meeting, and the first thing that she says at the IEP meeting is, well, John's never here. Well, there's a reason for that. And the interesting thing was that the vice principal just said, okay, here's what we can do for this IEP. We're going to take John out of that class, and that teacher's going to do something else. So they just cut that class out of my schedule completely, because you have a teacher that doesn't want to really work with the IEP, cut the teacher out. That was the vice principal's call. And so there was an accommodation there with some difficulty with the school, but it worked out, and from there on out we kind of had that mentality that, well, if the class doesn't work, we're going to substitute it for something else. And so I took that class online to make up for it at a later point in time. And after that, we also kind of came to the idea of, well, let's let's do a little bit less classes per year so it doesn't become as stressful, and just add one more year at the end, so then it'd be just one more year of high school at the end, which was, pretty good accommodation. Less stress, not as many classes per day, just cut out 1 or 2 classes per year, and just kind of make that up with one final year in high school.
With you being a teenager, John, was that okay with a teenage like you being in high school for 5 years? That was a problem for you? Or is that not a social thought as most peers?
For a while it was bothersome, wondering what other students would think about me being behind a class. It was psychologically a little difficult to deal with, but I look back on it now as a positive experience because there were lots of benefits to it as well. Yep. And there was now this was going back a long time ago. 1992 to 1996 was a time where the school didn't even know what Asperger's was. And it was even going by, the school was going by a different name. They just called it right brain. That's all they called it. And one teacher, a second grade teacher at my school, absolutely did not believe in Asperger's or autism or anything like that. And so she basically refused to follow any accommodations, and that was a difficult class to get through because of that. And at that point, we weren't at the point of thinking about, oh, well, we can just take them out of that. No, that thought came with that 9th grade science teacher. We didn't have that thinking that we had that kind of a authoritative power in 92 area, where a teacher just didn't believe in it. And she never even attended IEP meetings. She just didn't go. So there are some difficult teachers, but I do think that things have really evolved from there, because now Asperger's is accepted as something real as compared to early 90s where a teacher didn't even believe in it.
Could I add something? Sure. Also, it is, you're right, according to the IDEA law that governs how special education works, to require that the school provide training for the staff who will be working with the child. Training in dealing with children with Asperger's, or autism it's called in general now. In some school districts like Fargo and West Fargo, they have Asperger teacher coaches whose function is to help teachers learn about it, to support the child, and to make sure that the correct accommodations are written into the IEP. Those people are extremely helpful, and that's somebody you should ask for at your IEP meeting. I'm not sure how that works in the Minnesota schools. I know that they do have folks who work through special education, but they call it learner support services that I've heard good things about. You can request them. But this wasn't even identified until 1994, so you're kind of one of the trailblazers in learning what is needed to support folks like you. And thank goodness for you and your folks for sticking it out and advocating, because it's making a difference for all the rest of us.
Yep.
Did you finish it?
Almost. And one thing I was going to say, in addition to that, was that after that class, early 90s with second grade teacher that didn't believe in it, another teacher, after kind of observing me and seeing how I tick, then approached my parents and said, we found another student that acts just like John, so we'll be able to apply with what we've learned from John to help this other child. So that was a big plus.
Thank you.
And that was working. So I believe fully in IEPs. It's very helpful. A lot of custom-built IEPs were helpful throughout the school year, and it was adjusted each year and looked upon each year. And really, if you have a teacher that just refuses to follow the IEP, well, like with my 9th grade science teacher, cut them out, work with the school.
Go to the principal and say, you realize that this person is obligated by law to follow this and implement this. And if he or she doesn't, I have legal recourse. Or you could do something about changing who's there, make sure this person knows this and gets the training they need. Because an IEP is a legal document and it's enforceable. I think one of the things that our family learned about IEPs, and realized that I came from elementary education, elementary special education, and elementary school counseling, was that there need to be a number of goals. When we first got started here, that was first, he was diagnosed here. The first IEP had one goal, and it was not measurable, it was not specific, it was not helpful. And what we discovered is it's important to go into the meeting with ideas about what you would like to see the school addressing with your child. Maybe not specifics about academics, but some things in general, like the shortened assignments. Like Colin was able to get, once he could show mastery with 5 to 10 math problems, and he had to cover half the page because that was too many to see the whole page, then he could stop. Once he demonstrated mastery, he didn't have to keep repeating and repeating. That was a goal that we needed in the IEP, not, oh, well, we'll work on that as we go. This is a document that you should be able to hand to a substitute teacher, and she would know what accommodations and strategies your child will need during the day. Another thing I wanted to mention to you is that your handouts talk more about creating a behavior intervention plan and support. There's one here. You can see where I got it at the bottom. This is an excellent resource because it has a whole printout about this. The thing about the positive behavior intervention plans is that the purpose is to teach the child a more acceptable replacement behavior. You don't just tell somebody to stop doing something. What do I do instead? And there's a whole format for how to do that. And we're currently working with the school on how to do that. So you may be bringing something new to folks. And that's okay. That's okay. We have like a minute. Does anybody else have one last comment or question?
Another thing, I always, in such a mobile society, they need this IEP so that you can hand this IEP if you move to a new school, so it can be implemented the minute you walk in the door to a new school.
Absolutely, that's a very important point. This is portable, and the new school must
and it's a
honor
picture.
it.
Oh, okay, first day of school, we got to do this. We have a picture of what we have to do.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
I also started thinking, I do this with my neurotypical middle school. This IEP has to involve things that help her communicate, help her regulate, and help her advocate. And if those things are not in there, then they need to be implemented as so.
Those are your long-term goals.
And
then everything else, how to get to that.
How to get to that.
Excellent.
My daughter needs to communicate because if she does math but can't communicate, then that doesn't serve her purpose. If she can't regulate herself to know when she needs a break and can take a break, then that's not helpful either. If she can't advocate for herself, then that leads to more meltdowns and that leads to a bit. So those three things, and surprising, like I said, when I went to Colorado with my neurotypical boy, and the counselor was like, "That's fantastic." And I'm like, "Right? I know, I just saw that." But it works for every kid. Those three things, and then like you said, it just, everything else will fall into place. That's kind of our launch point when we go in tonight.
Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your being here.
When you go on to the website, you click on the links, and you go to the YouTube site, But we can help this reach a larger audience by subscribing, pressing the like button, or commenting. So please do that to help us
Get the word out.
get the word out and promote it more. The more comments, the more likes, the more shares, the more subscribes, the higher it's going to be in a ranking with Asperger's awareness to help other people and reach further people as much as we possibly can. So go out to the YouTube site, please comment, subscribe, share.